Well, I think more and more I'm seeing people uh, kind of embracing non-straightforward strategies for prompt engineering in a way that doesn't have to be like, oh, use this crazy trick that doesn't make sense, but more like, oh, what if we, like the one I'm thinking of in particular is like weighting things in a human way, with like human emotion of like, this is like explaining why something is important to you as a human being improves performance in some cases. And the combination of like strategic emotional thinking and like analytical thinking is an exciting one to me, and probably something I'll like variations of that I'll be talking about a lot with all of these questions. But I also the kind of like use of prompt engineering and complex prompt engineering for essentially software development, I think is a really interesting area that I know we're pushing forward and some other companies as well, where it's like you can use this to, you know, generate things that are usable in a programmatic way, like with sort of interstitial programmatic steps, and help to like build something in the on the back end that wouldn't be possible otherwise. I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, I remember back with like GPT-3, like Text Da Vinci 003, some of the prompts you came up with. Like even that, like nowadays, you don't need some of those like super crazy
Mm-hmm.
prompts where there's something about like an Irish parent or something that I remember Celia or something like that.
Oh yeah, that was one that was it was sort of what I would call like an asymmetrical multi-shot prompt where it was not the same task, but it was like an example of another task that was designed to make it like better at interpreting, like inferring human emotions
Mhm.
and like interpreting human actions and stuff. And it could sort of be like glued onto other prompts. I think with that model, it did make it more prone to sort of like going off the rails though. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that part's interesting too, is like I think like as far as like advancements in prompt engineering, I think there'll probably be like less of like that sort of thing required as like
Mhm.
new and better models come out. Um, but I don't think it's ever going to be like build me a website and then it's just going to build you a website exactly how you wanted it, right? Because like there's always like the level of like the end goal that you had in your mind, and instructing whether it's a person or whatever, right? Like instructing an AI
Mhm.
to like get to that end goal that you had is always going to require the ability to concisely explain exactly what it is that you want. You know, I think it'll
Yeah.
be better at like not hallucinating in the future and like maybe even like guiding you to like get to the right prompt. But yeah, it's a skill that I think like everybody's gonna have to have. Just kind of like 40 years ago, uh, software engineering wasn't a thing, and then now that's a huge job in the industry. I could see this becoming
Hmm.
kind of the same thing.
Yeah,
I think
I
that's
think
actually
prompt
like a
engineering nowadays,
natural. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Anna.
just quickly, I think prompt engineering nowadays, to sort of to your point, is like less about reining in undesirable behaviors and more about like pushing the capability of the AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to me, I think about it really as like the last mile of actually being able to get what you want out of a model. Rob, to your point, like without a brain computing interface, AI can't read your mind. So let's just presume, until we get AGI and brain computing interfaces, that's just going to continue to be the case. Which means that we really have to be good at communicating what we want in a really, verbose or appropriate manner in order to be able to get what these models to do actually what we have, implanted in our brain. What really gets me excited is actually what we have seen over and over again from research such as Microsoft put out about MedPrompt, which is honestly fascinating. The idea that a model that, and for those not familiar, right, what Microsoft proved or tested was does a fine-tuned model that is specifically trained on medical information perform better than the same model that is just the same base model with prompt engineering. And whereas, every company in the world right now is thinking about fine tuning as like the only way that you can get these models to do what you want, what they concluded was that is actually not the case. The base model without fine tuning with great prompt engineering actually performed better at something as highly specialized as answering medical questions, which is absolutely mind-blowing, right? When you think about what that really means for us, it means obviously there's a lot of effort that goes into, fine-tuning a model. There's also limitations. Once you fine-tune a model, you can't just, use the exact same inputs to get the same outputs out of another model, which means you have a sense of lock-in, and there's really a lot of effort to get to that end. So when I think about what that means for a business, it means that prompt engineering is actually one of the most core skill sets that you need to be building, in the same way that, when we saw in the heyday of SaaS applications, companies were poaching up the best developers solely so they wouldn't be hired by their competition. And this is kind of a nascent space. Obviously, there's a lot of growth and things that are evolving. But when you think about really, what it means to be able to work with AI in order to drive outcomes, it's not just left to your, ML engineering team to sit down and fine tune a model and spend 6 months with garnering training data or generating synthetic data in order to make it happen. It means, frankly, you and me can create, outstanding outputs, which is a level of human empowerment that I don't think has existed in the past, and something we should all be really excited about.
The thing that really opens up to, it's like a fine-tuned model. Like if you think of like classification models from like last year, like I speak about like it's old school, but like this was like state of the art, like not that long ago. Like they're always a black box, right? So I always use like just like lead scoring example, right? Like lead scoring models in the past, you'd pass a bunch of data in and the output would be a score. And you can think about that as like a fine-tuned model. Like it can't really explain how it got there. It's just like, hey, based on the data you sent me, this is an 86. You can't like ask it like, why is it an 86? Just like, I don't know, it's just that's how I was trained, right? But like with this stuff, because like prompt engineering is actually better, one, that does mean it's like more flexible. You're not locked in. You can continuously improve this without like needing a machine learning skill set. You just have to be able to articulate the thing that you're looking for. And the model can actually tell you, like, okay, like what is this? What score is this between 0 and 100? And then all you have to say is like, and explain your reasoning. You'd be like, oh, I'd give this an 86, and here's why. Like, and then you can like look at it and be like, oh, I see why I gave it an 86. Then you can take that feedback and refine your prompt a little bit.
Right, do something about it in the immediate sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that like back and forth like interaction and like talk about like building applications is super important in the development phase. It's like literally what the development is. It's like you explain the thing that you want, you test it, you see the results, like, okay, that's 80% there. Then you just spend the rest of the time like getting it, like tying up the loose ends, getting it so it is interpreted the way that you want it. And I think that's like the real skill in prompt engineering. It's not necessarily like getting it right on the first try. It's like understanding like where it's getting it wrong and understanding like where in your instruction it's misinterpreting what you're trying to do and then fixing that in the instruction.
And I think there's a little bit of this like slightly uneasy marriage right now of like natural language skill sets and like, on the more like STEM or like computer science side, like people who are used to like systems thinking and analytical thinking, like being sort of their domain. And then suddenly natural language skills and writing skills and communication skills are not only like, it's not like they're a rival to that. It's like they need to be integrated into that. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot more people taking advantage of like their own ability to like think in a system sense and also, have those writing skills at the same time to execute what they're thinking of. And I think that'll be like sort of the new domain of just like capability development with these models. And right now, I think those two sides are not super psyched about working with each other, but I think that'll change.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, certainly this is way better than like early days of like, large, sorry, I didn't say large language model because we talk about that all the time. But big data engineering, remember you used to have to staple like a business analyst to someone that actually knew how to write code, to someone that actually understood how to work with large data sets in order to get anything done. Obviously, that innovation ended up really being accomplished by, a lot of abstraction layers being added, and there being, data platforms that make it a lot easier to be able to do that. So you don't have to, learn how to, do all the ones and zero work. But I think this is a lot smaller of a chasm to cross, right? Because it's so accessible, and because working with someone that communicates well or developing communication skill is actually the opposite of what it's been historically, right? Historically, we had to learn how to talk like a computer. now computers learn to talk like us. And so it's really, really putting the human in the center again.
Well, so Anna, what was your background before you worked at Copy.ai?
I was a biographical and historical research assistant.
Mm-hmm. But I think like to Shakar's point there, it's like your background, you can now like you're a world-class prompt engineer, right? Like one of the best in the universe at doing this stuff. And like your background isn't a technical one, right? I think that's really interesting.
100%. And honestly, I think you've picked up all of the code concepts that like are important in order to be able to be productive and, you know, be able to do things like debug, right? That's just systems thinking at its core. Really, the layer that used to exist between you and being able to do, you know, all the amazing stuff that you're able to do at Copy AI required like literally years of work, right? Like you had to go like learn fundamentals of programming and learn, you know, data structures and all kinds of things in order to be able to do something simple. But I think like, you know, the inverse is actually even more interesting. You can teach someone logical reasoning, and arguably like someone with your background, like probably took a symbolic logic class and, you know, is probably more familiar with logic and a lot of contexts, even if it's not the same.
And it is like this strange thing where like I've learned, you know, coding concepts that I need to know to like debug and that kind of thing. And also like there's code that needs to be generated by the prompts I write. So I need to like, you know, learn enough for that. But it's also about like learning bits of coding concepts in order to communicate with the AI, because there are things where it recognizes like this means replace something, and that like comes from coding language rather than from natural language, and like marrying those two things where it's like, you know, you're moving back and you have to move back and forth pretty seamlessly between like this is what this structure means, and like also within it I can phrase in, you know, just the right way this concept that it needs to fill out this structure with, for instance, just to give an example.
Yeah, like micro prompts. It's like for anybody listening that like doesn't know exactly what that means, it'd be like we've done this in the past with like email generation, where it's like you have the structure of the email that you want. So it's like paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, and then within you have like a micro prompt. So you have like the macro prompt, which is like generate an email that takes on this structure. And then within the structure, you actually have like the replace like micro prompts, where it's like first paragraph, it's like introduce yourself and like mention something interesting about their profile to make a personal connection. The second would be like, you know, pitch our product in a compelling way that's like relevant to this person's like day to day. And the third one would be like sign off and like propose a meeting or something like that. And it'll know to like replace that in the structure that you gave it with like the micro prompts, I guess, and like the macro instruction to generate a really good email, like in the structure that you want every single time.
But there's also kind of like this psychological element to it where it's not human psychology, but you are applying these principles of like, oh, it isn't connecting its answer to like this reasoning because of like the order of this, or like it was influenced by this other element of the prompt in such a way that it thinks like covertly thinks that is relevant, or it's drawing more from that, or like I see why it like came to this conclusion or whatever. So you have to kind of like get inside its brain too. But I'm like amazed by human communication. We impart so much information in so few, if you want to think of it this way, tokens. And we're incredible at it. And we're incredible at interpreting and just gleaning such rich information from such minimal communication. And it, you know, it has to do with context, obviously, and tone, of course, but I'm even talking in written communication where we, you know, have to account for each other's, like we don't write everything, you know, pedantically, like exactly correctly. We don't say everything exactly correctly. And we make mistakes all the time where we do not in a literal way say quote unquote the right thing that we're actually trying to get across, and it never even occurs to the other person because they understand. Still, human communication is so much like intelligent inference of mistake making. It's really kind of incredible. And I think these models, like it is a weird tension there because they are learning to communicate like humans, but they're also, we want them to get better at precise instruction following, and sometimes those two objectives are completely at odds because humans don't communicate that way. But you do have tasks where you're like, no, even though you think it should be this way, like I have this really precise thing for you to do. And I wonder if that'll split off more with future models in a way where we'll kind of be able to have models that are more on the like super precise instruction following side, and models that will be maybe more the like user facing one that like interprets the initial communication. And
That's such a good
maybe those
segue.
precise instruction following ones will be used more for like purely back end prompt engineering. Yeah, I think like I more and more I've been kind of splitting my thinking about it in two, where there's sort of what I think of as, and it's not this simple, but like front end prompt engineering, which is sort of like a user's communication with the AI. Like, I want you to write this letter for me. I want it to be this way. And then there's the potential on the basically the software development side to use AI to like generate creative code for the thing you're doing, which is like kind of what workflows is built on. And I think both hold a lot of potential. I think on the user side, like people will get better and better at it. I think on the sort of back end side, as I think of it, like that'll just be pushed farther and farther. And I don't think that the the sort of like back end, more like software development side of it will go away, because I think when you are getting it to generate something that like hasn't existed before and it's with this really complex structure, that's still, that takes quite a bit of skill. And I also think like it's not a question of just like, oh, we'll achieve the objective and we won't need prompt engineering anymore. Shakar, I know you've heard me say this, Rob, maybe as well, but I used to think of it like this, and I think a lot of people do, where like this is what the machine is capable of, and this is or what we want the machine to be capable of, and this is like what the models are capable of now. And like prompt engineering like lives in between, and so it gets smaller and smaller and smaller as time goes on. And I used to think of it that way and be kind of scared of that, but it just hasn't happened that way. It's been a lot more like this. Whereas the models get more powerful, prompt engineering also gets more powerful.
That is
Yeah, I
such a
agree
great
with
way
that.
to think about it. I think that a lot of people really do conceptualize that as like prompt engineering is just a, temporary thing that everyone's trying to figure out because it's the only way to get value out of models today. But to your point, like that's going to continue to be the case, even in a world where we have AGI, right? Which I don't think is 5 years away, probably a little further than that. But even in a world where we have AGI, we don't have a world of perfect understanding. We could have multimodal models that are able to understand all kinds of image, text, and sound input. But that still doesn't mean they, can effectively read your mind and do exactly what you want. Now, I think a lot of the skills and tricks that we see on, Twitter these days are probably going to be less relevant. You don't have to tell ChatGPT or Copy.ai chat that you're going to tip it $20 to get a good answer. We might even be able to do positive prompting, so you don't have to like use negative reframing to get, it to do something like not think about the pink elephant or not, do those things. I think those are the kinds of things that are kind of hacky today that, might end up becoming
Mm-hmm.
a lot easier. But, these models are going to continue to be trained on large, large, large corpuses of information. And this is the first time in human history that I think we've created something that we genuinely don't know the limits of. So, if that continues to be the case and we don't have like a fully known universe, I don't think, we've made really that much progress in AI explainability up until this point, and probably don't see that happening for the next 5 years, given where profits are. Prompt engineering is going to be really critical because people are going to continue to make things that they don't know what they're capable of. And we're going to have to find very, very effective ways to command those models to do the things that we need. So maybe some of the tricks go away is my TLDR, but I honestly think your graph of like they're both going to continue. The gap might get a little bit smaller to be able to get the basic things that you want out, so you can get good linked input,
Mm-hmm.
good summaries, things like that. Maybe lower the user burden, but the back end side of it is going to
Yeah.
continue to be massive. And I think that's really where it's going to pay to have all those tricks in your pocket now, because you will be well ahead of the curve when it comes time for advanced prompt engineering 5 years from now.
I think it's prompt engineering is a skill worth investing in and learning. It's not going to go away. And I think like folks who take the time to learn it are just going to be more and more valuable in the future. I mean, like as the models do grow, the capabilities will grow, but you're still going to have to understand how to unlock those capabilities. I mean, just like, talking to, any other person. Like you could talk to the smartest person in the world, and they're not going to give you what you want unless you can clearly articulate the thing that you want from them. But yeah, I think it's never going to be a skill that goes away, and understanding how they interpret human language and how to get the result that you want is a worthwhile endeavor.
I'll jump in on that. That originally was going to be my takeaway here, but I think I can build on that. Not only is it something that's not going to go away and something that's going to be a critical skill set in the future, but when you zoom out and really think about what your ability is to actually use this technology for whatever you're trying to do. If you're not building the skill set today, you are seeding yourself to a world where you're continuing to be just a user, right? All you will do is interact with AI through other user interfaces that someone else has built. Granted, Copy.ai is an interface, but we hope that you agree at this point that it's a pretty raw interface that gives you a lot of control. If you haven't tried it, of course, give it a shot. But big picture here, if you don't learn prompt engineering, then all of your AI functionality, your ceiling is basically what someone else has created for you. So why would you waste this moment where you can actually be in control of your own destiny, be in control of how you use AI to do the things that are relevant and important to you. And as time goes on, that is just going to continue to be more and more capable things that you can actually have these models do. So I think you're honestly just selling yourself short, limiting your potential if you think this is just a phase and don't invest in it, because it's a really important skill set, and it's really an extension of what you can do as a person.
I sometimes see people kind of test a prompt and the AI does not a great job or a mediocre job, and they kind of go, oh, it's not capable of that, not to the standard I need it to be. And I would just encourage our users to like really invest in their communication with the AI. It's not quite a human being, but in terms of how you communicate with it. But even if you want to think of it that way, like the way you would like invest in your communication with a human being who is doing something very complex for you, and giving it the kind of careful consideration and like time you would to another person. And I think that even that like philosophy is a good starting point for like getting just better generations from it, better output from it.
This actually makes me go back to your thought, Anna, about back end and front end prompt engineering, and it makes me wonder, like, is there even like and I know this almost sounds like a step back, so I feel dumb even saying this, but like, is there a future where there is much more of a syntax or a wrapper or some sort of like more specific way of speaking to models in order to be able to instruct them to do things? And would that thing borrow from all of these other concepts? I mean, in a sense, like that's kind of what programming was, right? We had these logical concepts of like repetition, if, ands, or, all of these thoughts, and we made a symbolic representation of it. And we all agree that that's going to be how it works. Now, models aren't the same, right? They're not as obviously dense as, writing some JavaScript code or even older code than that. But there
Mhm.
are times where I feel like, having at least like a markup language, right? Similar to kind of maybe a future version of how OpenAI is kind of thinking about their chat ML markup today, would actually allow us to be a lot more specific about how we communicate with models. And Rob, to your point, like maybe there are other things that we can borrow from other languages that are still accessible to, I guess the dominant language or English, for lack of better terms, most people speak it. That would make back-end prompt engineering that much more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this a lot. Like, is there some perfect way, some perfect efficient language that we could speak to the AI, and that would be like the best way to communicate with it, not just like
Like
out of
Esperanto or
human
whatever.
languages, but just, yeah, kind of like the equivalent of that. Where and there was this paper a long time ago, probably like less than a year ago, but
Ages ago.
that
That was a
ages
lot. That's
ago,
early prompt
back in
engineering.
the prehistoric times, that was like they had it sort of generate variations on prompts. I forget how exactly they did this, but basically they ended up with like nonsense prompts that performed as well as like the non-nonsense version of the prompt, and they were very strange. And I did go down this rabbit hole of like trying to use like almost the AI's language to do things, and it was very difficult to recreate. And yeah, I haven't heard much about it since. I think it was like a little bit of a like an interesting fluke or like an interesting tangent, but like I think like I mean a lot of like the sort of perfect way to communicate with it is less about like what is the perfect form of communication and more like what is in its corpus hugely. Like it loves XML. Is XML everyone's favorite coding language? Of course not, but like it has a lot of XML in it. It seems to understand XML pretty well, so like that's weirdly come back, things like that. So there's both like what it we can be like, oh, it finds this the most efficient or this, and be like, oh, maybe that means something, but it also means something about how it's like just what we've been doing for the
Yeah.
last whatever and what's in its corpus.
Well, the interesting part to me about that is like there's no hard and fast rules. It's like they've been discovered. That's not like
Yeah.
OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever comes out with a new model and it's like, here's exactly how you use it. It's like, here's some guidelines we found that work pretty well, but I think that's like going to be a really interesting area. It's like I still feel like every day I find new ways to use this and discover capabilities and stuff that it can do. But like just I feel like we barely scratched the surface of even like existing models on some of the capabilities. And I wonder like how deep somebody could go on prompt engineering and prompt chaining and stuff to unlock the capabilities that like no one is even aware of that the models can do.
Yeah, that's actually what I find most fascinating, and like directly to the point about like first time in human history, there's not a handbook or even an understanding of how these things really work and what they're capable of. And that's what makes, I think, this whole process so much more interesting. And one thing that's just struck me working here is the number of times where I've heard something that I thought was ridiculous on first glance when Anna was explaining it to me. And it works. I don't know why it works, but it worked incredibly well. And then like 2 weeks later or a month later, a customer is going to share, or I scrolling through Twitter and I find a research paper that's literally about the last example of this was like emotive language and how there's like genuinely real research on how emotive language gets models to perform better. It's something that we intuitively know, probably not something that Copy.ai is going to publish a research paper on. But there's so many things that are just groundbreaking in that they're discovered. I think the folks that are on the edge kind of see it, but it's not until a little bit later that someone actually puts some real science behind it and says, no, we actually quantified this and there's a real impact. And so it really just goes to show, like, you can't wait for the research paper, right? Especially in a space that moves this quickly. You got to move just as quickly. You got to experiment. You got to try. And that's actually maybe the most fun part of prompt engineering, banging your head against the wall, trying to get something to work and it actually working. And
then suddenly it does.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even like the research paper, they'll probably find some like local minimum, but like, what are the odds that that's like the best approach, like the global minimum? Like I know the research paper around like telling them it's important to you or offering a tip or like whatever. Like prior to that, I was banging my head against the wall on the problem, and I said like this, like you must do this. It's legally mandated, and if you do not do this, I'll go to jail. And it worked. And then like that research paper came out, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like it validates that approach, but like there's probably a better approach that no one's just stumbled across yet or quantified or whatever.
Yeah, and ages ago, just a little anecdote about like a similar thing. I was this was like before ChatGPT was completion style models, and they were very bad at self-evaluating. Like if it gave a wrong answer and you asked it like, is that correct? It even if you input the wrong, it would be like, yeah, it's correct, like every time. And so I wrote a prompt where it was a conversation between a mother and a child, and it was like, I'm your mother, I'll love you no matter what, just tell me if you're lying. And it worked for self-evaluation.
That's amazing.
It made it like much more accurate. And so yeah, it is interesting when like papers come out that validate these things, whether it's a month later or a year later or whatever, and it's satisfying and also like I knew it, like yeah.
Yeah, I find that like one of the funnest parts of working in this space and spending a lot of time in it. It's not just like validation, it's more so like truly feeling like you've discovered something, and that's beyond like what the creators, right, intended for you to discover, because at the end of the day they didn't know what it was capable of. And that to me represents ultimate possibility and really just a future and present really that everyone should be excited about. When else have you encountered something in the world that even if you went and like take like Disneyland for example, every kid including myself was excited to go to Disneyland. You wanted to see in every other amusement park, every corner, you wanted to ride all the different rides, but it was still knowable, right? You knew all of the different zones. You kind of had a sense for like where you want to go. This to me is like the ultimate Disney World, because there's no map. We've got to make the map. We just make the map by charting progress. And by the time we're even scratching the surface of what's possible, a new model comes out and there's even more to explore. So definitely
that's like the
starting
biggest piece of advice I give people too, where it's like people will ask me, it's like, is it possible to do this? I'm like, I have no idea. Like the problem, maybe
Yeah.
like let's
Yeah.
try it. Like let's just try it. Like so, like there's a ton of capabilities again that like haven't been discovered, and just like trying and banging your head against the wall, I almost guarantee that you could probably find a way to get it to do almost like anything that you're trying to do if you're clever enough.